Welcome to the AA Podcast, our little corner of the web where we are not afraid to discuss tough questions like,
when did nutrition, health, movement, and stress management become alternative medicine?
Where we embrace challenges in all aspects of life to become healthier and stronger versions of ourselves.
And where food and movement are the best kinds of medicine, and cooking meals at home is a revolutionary act.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the AA Podcast. This is Ashley Olson.
And I'm Andrea Crane.
And Andrea's trying to hold back laughter. She gets such a kick out of the countdown. It's quite comical.
We're on a TV show. 5, 4, 3. And then, camera, go.
Action, go. If you haven't figured out by now, one, we love to have fun, and we're very goofy. We know our stuff, but we like to have a good time. So we're continuing our discussion and series on hormones, specifically for perimenopause and menopause women. And today we're going to be getting into the hormone estrogen. But before we do that, we are going to share our weekly Bible verse. And mine is coming from Psalm 3:3-5. And it says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. I cried out loud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me."
Yeah, there is a theme. Ashley and I have both been deep in the Psalms the last couple of weeks. So mine is again from Psalm 27, verse 14 this time. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord.
So good.
If you don't get it, wait.
And that's the hardest.
I know.
We like to help God a lot, you know, and if I just do this, then he'll be able to provide sooner.
I know.
Yeah.
We help like 2-year-olds.
Yeah. All right, Andrea. So last episode, we were talking all about progesterone, and I thought we did a really awesome job.
Of course.
Of going over, common symptoms and like what you can do, both in lifestyle, but also, and we're going to dive more into the HRT side of things as we move on. But so today we're talking about estrogen, and like we mentioned in the last episode, progesterone and estrogen are like, they have this perfect dance, or they need to have a perfect dance. If one's low, the other one's high. If the other one's low, the other one's high. And so a lot of times, the testing, and you talked about this a little bit, the testing of timing, one, in your cycle, but then two, taking the average or a ratio of both, correct?
Right. So you take the serum concentration, and there it gets a little tricky because for instance, sometimes some labs will measure in like picograms per deciliter, and another lab will measure in nanograms per milliliter, and so you have to have like
almost
the same
consistency.
Units. Yeah, you gotta have consistent units. So that calculus gets a little weird. It's a lot of decimal moving, and it matters. You've got to be correct. But yeah, so I will calculate a ratio, and just make sure that my patients are in that ratio, and that ratio is what determines if there is like an estrogen dominant state, if there's not like that frank estrogen excess that you see in the lab. So I look at the labs, and sometimes I'll go, holy cow, that's a lot of estrogen, right? But then other times I'll be like, okay, well, that's the high end of normal, but let's see where it is. Where do we fall, when we calculate that ratio with progesterone? And if this is kind of a foreign concept to you, then go back and listen to the previous one, because it will make a whole lot more sense.
Absolutely. So today, estrogen, which we'll probably still talk a little bit about progesterone too, but what is the primary role of estrogen in the body, and why is it so important for the reproductive health?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I describe estrogen as the queen of the female hormones. She is like queen with a crown. This is the feminizing hormone. So, after a girl has her first period, which is called the menarche, it estrogen sort of reigns supreme. That's where those secondary sexual characteristics come into play, breast development, and on and on. But estrogen is really the feminizing hormone. Okay. And there's a dance between estrogen and testosterone too, right? Because it's not, females don't have a complete absence of testosterone. We just don't have as much as our male counterparts. Now, they also have estrogen levels, and so that needs to be looked at in males also. But in females, estrogen, it uh, let let's go to the uterus for a second, because I feel like we spent quite a lot of time there in terms of what progesterone does in the uterus.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about its counterpart, estrogen, because last time I talked about one of the roles of progesterone is really to protect the uterus from the effects of excessive estrogen. And so when we look at what estrogen does, it thickens the lining of the uterus. And remember, I told you last time that estrogen causes bleeding. So if you have excess estrogen, and we'll get to this in a second, but think bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. And this will be bleeding in between cycles. This will be heavy bleeding during cycles, all of those things. But this makes sense when you think about, a really thick endometrial lining that has to then slough off, right? That's a lot of tissue that we're getting rid of. And so you will have the excessive bleeding. So that makes sense. Now, it there is a good part to thickening the lining of the uterus. We want it again in that Goldilocks range. There's always this idea of homeostasis in the body, right? Like not too much, not too little, just right. So we want the uterine lining to be just right, and progesterone thins it out, and then estrogen thickens it up, for various phases of the menstrual cycle. So, yeah, but what's really exciting to me, especially at this phase of life that I'm in, is that it's so protective. Estrogen is so protective, and so it protects, my goodness. And we're going to get into like the nitty gritty of hormone replacement therapy and what impact it has on all these different body systems in the female. We're going to get into that in the very last episode of this particular hormone series. But for right now, I just want you to know that estrogen provides an incredible level of protection against cardiovascular disease, stroke. It is really, really critical for the vascular system. So think heart health, but also think vascular health. So all the blood vessels. Then we've got bone health. So osteoporosis. Yes, you don't need more milk. You need estrogen and weight bearing activity. Like that, that's the bottom line. You also, you don't have a Fosamax deficiency. You need estrogen and weight bearing activity. Also mucous membranes. So I got into this a little bit last time too. Vaginal health is huge. I cannot tell you, gosh, I cannot tell you how many women this affects, and it's terrible. They have horribly painful intercourse, and it really can drive a wedge within relationships, and that becomes a big problem for a lot of my patients. And so we can fix it with just some topical administration of estrogen. It does so much in just little tiny amounts. So mucous membranes all over the body are impacted by estrogen. So not just vaginal mucosa, but also the skin. So you'll notice that, oh my gosh, girl, this happened to me. You wake up there's so many times you wake up and you're just like, whoa, what happened overnight? Something crazy happened. Like, oh my gosh, now this new system just went offline. What the heck happened? What is happening? And so, yes, so your skin, like you wake up and you're just like, what is this creepy mess? What happened to me? Who beat me with a stick overnight? Like, it's terrible. your skin becomes like crepey and almost like kind of dried out, and you just don't feel like yourself. It's not even your skin. So that is when you know that estrogen has probably left the building, and you might need some labs.
Oh gosh.
So better believe I got some labs too sweet and figured that stuff out. So yeah, it maintains your skin, just that healthy, we call it turgor pressure. All right, so that's like the difference between, if you've got your grandma's hand, right, and you pull up the skin on the back of her hand, and it just kind of stays up when you pull it up, and so the turgor pressure is not good. So we want some more colloidal pressure in that skin to make it plump. And so that's one of the things that estrogen takes care of too.
That was
And
one of your self exams that you used to do.
oh yeah,
Like,
you can also tell dehydration. That's a measure of dehydration too. It's called skin tinting. So
mm,
you can like pull up the skin on the back of your hand, and it should, unless you're of a certain age, but when you pull that up, it should go right back down. And if it doesn't, and you're young, you're probably dehydrated.
mm,
So yeah, I know Ashley and I are reaching for our waters here. But yeah, so estrogen is really really heavily involved in the maintenance of skin membrane. So also, I wanted to just speak momentarily about the potency of this hormone. So I already
mm,
said she's the queen, but I had a hormone professor, believe it was in my nutrition program, but anyway, he was trying to get across to us just how potent this hormone is. Like tiny, teeny, tiny little bits of this have massive impact system wide. And so I'll never forget it. And I've shared this with patients over and over again. But you can think of estrogen like, think of a box car that trains carry around. So that whole big box car is full of water. Now
mm,
you have an eyedropper. You put one drop of estrogen in that whole box car full of water, and it will exert a long lasting physiological effect. So yeah, it's crazy how potent estrogen is. And so yeah, that's why, when you get labs back, it's measured in like nanogram or picogram concentrations. It's just that you don't need much. It exerts a really really um, huge huge impact with just a tiny tiny bit.
okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of what estrogen does in the body.
Okay. And I really do want to actually get into your experience with estrogen therapy later, not
Oh,
necessarily now,
yeah, yeah.
but I think that would be super helpful
Yeah.
for, and it
Well,
was
you'll probably
really,
have to help me remember what all was terrible, because my goodness, I know I did several months of whining. So yeah, you'll have to refresh my memory, because I feel way better now.
it was like a
Man.
light switch.
Oh my gosh. It's like, oh man, I'm not gonna kill anybody. My family
Uh-huh.
is gonna be okay. They're gonna get out of this alive, and so am I.
Yeah.
So
So we talked a little bit of it last time with we hear a lot of like excess estrogen, and so
mhm.
that's a lot of times when doctors will prescribe birth control to bring that down, correct?
Yes, potentially so. Yes.
And so what is that? Like what does
Yeah.
that mean?
Yeah, so that is kind of this idea of estrogen dominance, right? So
Yes.
so there are certain concepts within the zeitgeist that go around, like SIBO, like, yeast and mold, and oh gosh, Candida was one. Like everybody had Candida, and then everybody had SIBO,
Oh,
and
yes.
then oh gosh, and everybody has thyroid disease. And yeah, so there are certain things that go around, and I'm not upset about this. It's just the public learning about things, and I think that's good. I really
Yes.
think that's good. But it's funny to me that, you'll get like this spate of patients coming in, like they're all asking about the same thing, and that's what's happening out in the culture, that okay, people are becoming hip to this or that, and they're learning about this or that, so they're asking about it. But
And that's
estrogen
Yeah. Well, and that's
Estrogen. Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, it kept going in and out. Well, that's the beauty of learning, but also for me as somebody that's out here fumbling through all the information and
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
figuring out what is true, like what's your true
Mhm.
north, if you will,
Yeah.
and where to find good resources is
Right.
also. And I think that we were going to do a episode on that too, of like some solid resources
Yeah.
for research.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a great point because it is really hard for patients to like I think I want to be careful here, but I think a lot of times patients don't feel well supported and they don't feel listened to.
Yes.
So sometimes when, and believe me, I'm not impugning my community because we work really hard, and we're all out here doing our best. But I do feel like a lot of times patients don't feel heard when they bring concerns.
Well, go back to our episodes on what was that?
Oh, the primary care visits. Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
because that
Yes.
was such a
Yeah.
great episode. And I have heard from multiple people how eye-opening that was. I mean, it was
Hmm.
eye-opening for me
Oh, that's
when
so
you
good.
first talked about like what a primary care visit was. And I was like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and so even today I was talking to a client and I was like, call back the front office and tell them
Mm.
all of your symptoms.
Good, good,
Give them
good.
notes before you go in
Yes.
this week. That way your
Yes.
doctor actually has time before
Yes.
the visit
Mm-hmm.
to um
Prepare.
prepare and to
Mm-hmm.
realize, okay, she's not just coming in to complain about a silly thing. Like there's
Right.
absolutely a story to
Right.
unfold here. So
Yeah.
if you haven't listened to that already, I highly recommend it. So yeah. But
Yes.
yeah, it's not that you guys are not trying to do your best. You truly are, but you're limited in with the time that is allotted to you,
Yeah.
both on the research side, prepping, but also
Right.
just a lot of times you go into these episodes or these clinical
Appointments.
visits
Yeah.
and you actually don't know what you're supposed to get like preparing for. Like you
Right.
might think you're preparing for one thing and then
Yeah.
they come in for another. So,
Exactly. And I can speak for, at least all the clinicians that I know. We do prepare for your visit. And so if I don't know what you're coming in for, then you're not getting my best.
mhm.
Because I do want to look things up. I don't know everything. Like I gosh, there are so many there are clinicians out there that have forgot way more than I will ever know. And so you got to give us a clue. I really want to help. But often I don't just have everything at my fingertips like I wish I did. So,
Yeah.
yeah, more info is better.
Mhm.
So along that line, that this idea of estrogen dominance has kind of hit the culture, and so yeah, people are listening to these symptoms of, gosh, what does that mean? Yes, I have all of those things. And so you very well may be estrogen dominant, but if you recall, I gave this caveat at the last episode also. You want to make sure that you check in with yourself. What is your level of stress, right? What does your life look like? Because if your life is chaotic and crazy and has been for years, and you're working graveyards. I know I always pick on grays, but I worked them myself. I know they oh, they will suck your soul away. um
Mhm.
and so check in, do that self check in, but then also you need to know where your thyroid is, right? So thyroid and adrenals and the all of those hormonal inputs can look very, very similar to sex hormone issues.
Mhm.
So yeah, it all is part of the same system. So that's why I check all of these things together so that we can see the full picture. But yeah, getting your hormones checked, and estrogen excess is a real thing. Estrogen dominance is a real thing.
Mhm.
And here's what most people maybe don't know as they're trying to gather information about why am I in a stranger's body? I woke up and I am in somebody else's body, and something has gone horribly wrong. And so, then you start down the rabbit hole and it just becomes really hard. So, yeah, as you're looking, and maybe what you haven't come across yet is everybody thinks that menopause, like perimenopause and menopause, perimenopause is just that part leading up to the cessation of your menstrual cycles. So you don't have a period for 12 months. Welcome, you are in menopause. Like you have arrived. That's the end. um but as you're working up to that, there are these fits and starts, and nobody tells you about this. Like, that once you hit menopause, your hormones tank. Everybody knows that. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't have any left. They're all gone. They have left the building. They're gone. But what they don't tell you is that you can have these weird fluctuations before you get there, and those fluctuations can last 10 or 15 years. And so you have
surprise.
Yeah. I don't know which part of that unholy fall this is. Yeah, it's girl. Anyway, it is not for the faint of heart, but we'll all get through it. We will. And so estrogen in particular, because remember I told you how potent this thing is. So very small changes can lead to very big effects. And so you can actually have the impact of progesterone go down and maintain your level of estrogen. Well, guess what happens? You have now a misbalance, right? They're not in balance any longer. And so even though you may have what it would be considered a healthy level of estrogen, she's now way higher than that progesterone was, and she is exerting all kinds of crazy town effects over your world. And that can include things like really irregular periods. They can be closer together, and we're going to go through a lot of the same things that we went through when we talked about a progesterone deficit, right? Because remember, these things are the same. So bleeding, bleeding. Lots of women have very heavy periods, but remember what that estrogen's doing to the lining, right? It's thickening it. So you have to shed this big, thick lining. Also, depression, aggression, anxiety, irritability. So all of those mental effects can come along with having too much estrogen, because, estrogen is wonderful. It makes us who we are, and some of our crazy is what endears us to the people around us. However, there is a fine line. So let's not let our crazy flags go too high. And that's what estrogen does. It can also cause some fatigue, some difficulty sleeping. You can't concentrate. Although there's more of that coming. That's with everything. But also difficulty conceiving. If you're in that phase of life, it's very hard to conceive or maintain a pregnancy, right? Because estrogen is exerting more effect than it should over the progesterone. Also, remember we talked about the migraine headaches and all of these symptoms getting worse before each cycle. So that's what an excess estrogen situation looks like, or an estrogen dominant situation.
Okay, so obviously the opposite of that is like what happens or what does it look like when you have too little estrogen?
Okay, now we're starting to get into some of the classic, because remember, like, when you talk 30 years ago, you talk to a woman about menopause or perimenopause, and there is one symptom on everyone's lips, and that's it, and it's hot flashes.
Oh yeah,
Menopause,
that's all.
right? That's it.
That's it.
All menopause is it's hot flashes. No, there's a million things. Yeah, there's literally 10 million things. Okay, so let's just go through some of these things that can go along with let's see, opponent, joint, and muscle. Hang on, I want to put something else on here that I was just remembering. Okay, so hot flashes, yes, that is called vasomotor symptoms, and that definitely happens as your estrogen is tanking. So, when you're having all of these crazy, like, excess estrogen symptoms, you're not flashing. And so you don't automatically think, oh, this might be perimenopause. Like, this might be the thing, because you're not having hot flashes. We've done such a disservice to women by reducing all of these things down to, well, are you having hot flashes or aren't you? It's so much bigger than that. So if you're having hot flashes, though, that is a symptom of estrogen deficiency. Also, night sweats. Like, you'll wake up in a puddle. It's gross. Yeah, so super sweaty at night. Also, so we talked about some of the issues with oh, did I mention weight gain in excess estrogen? I wanted to
No, you
put that
didn't.
in there. Yeah, I want to put that in there because guess what? It's also a symptom of too little estrogen. So,
so again,
oh
Goldilocks.
yeah, no, you're screwed either way. So sorry, you got to get these things balanced out. You really got to get these things balanced. So yeah, it's in the deficiency, though. It's a little different. It's a different weight distribution. You will get more visceral fat, and this is the dangerous kind. This is the fat in the abdomen that is around the major organs.
Yep.
So it's that
so
visceral
starting to
fat.
get that pear shape.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or apple.
Or sorry,
even.
apple.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're starting to get that apple shape. We call it truncal or visceral adiposity. And so yeah, that's the difference with the deficiency of estrogen. And then also we talked about the vaginal symptoms. So again, if you lose vaginal tone, so the vagina is surrounded, it's very muscular tissue. And so guess what happens to muscle without estrogen? It breaks down. We always equate muscle with testosterone, right? Testosterone is the big Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles, and it's skeletal muscle, it's lean muscle. No, estrogen is also right up there with muscle maintenance and development. And so vaginal atrophy is huge, and that's where you get, like, the maintenance of that mucosal layer. So you get vaginal dryness and atrophy. So the muscle atrophies, the mucosal layer stops doing its job, and does not produce lubrication any longer. And then you get, often you'll get frequent urinary tract infections. So yeah, it's amazing what a little intravaginal estrogen will do for someone. I mean, all of these things can clear up, because honestly, guys, UTIs can be life threatening. And as we age, as we get into our 60s and our 70s and our 80s, UTIs look different. They look different, and often they don't present with those classic urinary symptoms like we're used to, like the frequency, urgency, painful urination, right? They don't present like that. And you can get septic rather quickly. So this is a big deal. And then there's also bloating that can happen, and acid reflux. Now, I have a theory on this acid reflux, because if we think about what's happening with muscle tissue, right? It is not supported because the estrogen is gone. Now, the pylorus is the top portion of the stomach, and then you've got the esophagus that goes down into the stomach, right? There's a ringed muscle called the pyloric sphincter that shuts off the acid, and it's like the top of a bag. If your stomach were a bag, and you would want to close off the top of that, because it's a bag of acid, right? So you don't want the acid washing back up into the esophagus. So you clamp down really tight with that ringed muscle. Now, as the muscle atrophies, what happens? Well, you can get some
through.
reflux. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So anyway, that's my theory. Also breast tenderness, muscle and bone atrophy. We've talked about that. But the final one I want to talk about is this musculoskeletal pain, you guys.
Oh
Oh
yes.
my gosh,
Yes.
it's awful. Like polyarthropathy like I have never felt before. I
Like you
honestly,
think you're gonna need a double knee replacement.
oh yeah, like I thought my autoimmune disease was flaring and that like my joints were being slowly eroded and destroyed and there wasn't anything I could do about it. Like it was just awful. The pain is really really astonishing, I'll say. And so and it's every day and you cannot get away from it, and it's like it robs you of flexibility and mobility, and it's really bad. And so yeah, getting on some estrogen is like, whoa, it's a whole new day. And it doesn't work overnight, but it has I have gotten so much function back, especially with my knees. It's
Yeah.
just crazy.
When I was there in January,
Oh
like
yeah.
you were in, I was like, whoa, this is bad.
Yeah,
Like
it
I
was
didn't.
terrible. I could not. I was absolutely not weight bearing. I couldn't bend down to my knees like
Yeah.
that. That I hadn't been able to do that for probably 6 months. By the time you got there, and it was just terrible. So yeah, I am now finally able to like weight bear. I can put a squat bar on my back. I think I went up to about 180 pounds. And
Nice.
able to like hit depth on a squat again. But
That's amazing.
it was bad, girl.
Yeah.
Bad. Yeah.
Um yeah, our one that you told me, you were like you were going to one of your son's games and you couldn't even
Mm-hmm.
sit in the bleachers without like being in excruciating pain because
Oh yeah. I mean,
it was
just
that.
like it was so embarrassing, like holding back tears at your son's basketball game because
Yeah.
the bleachers hurt so bad. And like looking up the bleachers and telling my husband, like, we're gonna have to sit down on the front because I can't crawl over these bleachers. Like I couldn't even, yeah, it was really, really terrible. And if you know me, like I don't have that kind of disability. Like I scramble
No.
around and yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh, that was really bad.
So speaking of, like,
Hmm.
obviously you're now on estrogen hormone
Yes.
replacement therapy.
Yes.
What are these supplements like that women can look
Yeah.
into?
Okay, so in the last one, and I like to give I like to give all of the complete story. Now, I have said all along that what I prefer to write for, if I'm writing a prescription for these things, what I prefer to write for is a bioidentical hormone that is compounded by a compounding pharmacy that you've got there locally. I really believe in those, and I think that's the very best source. However, there are estrogens that are available. um, I so here's what I'll say. Let's start here. Let's start with the dosage forms that are available in order to deliver estrogen. Okay, so commercially available, these are like you can write prescriptions for these. You can go to your local, just any pharmacy. They'll have it on the shelf. They can fill it, and you're out the door. Okay, so this would be things
Still with a
like,
doctor's note.
oh yeah, these are
Okay.
prescription only for sure. But this would be things like, and there really aren't any replacements for prescription estrogen. There's not much you can do aside from the nutritional inputs that we talked about last time. So getting proper fiber, getting proper protein and amino acid, getting proper fats, making sure you're getting those anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats, and not too many of the omega 6 fats, but that was in the last episode. So, all of those things apply here, as well as zinc and magnesium and all the rest of the inputs.
All
So,
the things.
all the things, the ATT, all the things. So yeah, but there are available, and I have women stabilized on these and they're fine. Some women come to me stabilized on these and then I just take over their care. But there are patches that you can put on. You apply them twice a week. And they will deliver transdermal estrogen across the skin because remember, estrogen is crazy potent, so we only need little teeny tiny bits of it, and it diffuses very, very readily across the skin because, again, it's a steroid. It is a fat soluble uh, compound, and so it just goes right through the skin. Okay, so there are patches, and then if I've got a woman and her only concerns really, I look at her lab work. Her estrogen looks good. I look at her progesterone. I look at her other things that are going on. And really, the only thing that we need is just some vaginal estrogen to control some symptoms like we talked about earlier. Then I will write for maybe a vaginal suppository, maybe a vaginal cream. There are foams, there are gels, there are, all kinds of. In fact, there's a commercially available ring. It's like a little ring, almost like a diaphragm, and it just gets vaginally inserted, and that stays there for days and days and days. So there are lots and lots of different dosage forms to get estrogen into the body.
Any one of those that you mentioned, like say, you and I were looking at as much holistic as possible. Are all
Yeah.
those in your realm of what would you say would be holistic?
Well, I I prefer the bioidentical compounded estrogen from your local pharmacy. And it is more expensive, it just is. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more labor involved. They compound the prescription for you. It is specifically for you. I can write for any strength that I want. And when we're talking about commercial preparations, like the stickers, like the patches that you put on, I can't write for any strength. Like I
Yeah.
can't send you home and say, oh, if you need a little more, we can titrate up this dose. But if I send you home with a compounded prescription to go to your pharmacy, your compounding pharmacy with, then I can say, hey, we can play with this dose all day long and we can figure out exactly what you need.
Yeah. So something definitely more customizable will
Yeah.
be more holistic, functional minded.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
whatever
but
but
uh,
like
I,
discuss it with your doctor and see what is
exactly.
feasible
Exactly. And
financially.
exactly. And that's the thing. It is my firm belief that women, I don't care who you are, where you are, you ought to get this information from your doctor. This ought to be available to you. And then
Mhm.
whether you choose to use hormone replacement therapy, that's completely up to you. But I
Right.
think it ought to be available for every woman.
Yes, I agreed. And I think, like you said, get the information
Mhm.
is the first step.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm newer into like the whole health side of things, but growing up, it was never discussed. It was just
Yeah.
like, oh, you're going
Yeah.
through that season of life. It's like, and it was
Exactly.
like a hush hush, put her away until she's done
Right.
type
Right.
thing.
I know. I know. Bring her out when she is this crepey shell of a human and she's probably finished.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's dried
Great.
up and done.
I know. Literally
Literally and
dried up
figuratively.
and done. Like, what? Yeah. No, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Hmm.
Crazy. So we don't have to, we don't have to go quietly into that good night.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Mhm.
I would just encourage women, you guys, if you're having some crazy symptoms, like if you're having brain fog, my goodness, did I put that? No, I didn't put that on the list. Hang on. Brain fog,
Uh-oh,
you
it's coming
guys.
into you.
Yeah, I know. Need to double my estrogen. No, brain fog. That was a really big deal. Now I needed to dial in my thyroid, because I've got an autoimmune thyroid condition, but I also needed to get my hormones dialed in. And so I can't tell you the level of just clarity, and when that mental fog is lifted, and you feel like you're crazy. You feel like, wow, what has happened? Am I getting dementia? Like, what? I don't have access to the things that I used to have access to. Now, I've done a lot of optimization in terms of like memory and cognition, and go back to listen to those episodes because there's tons of stuff in there that Ashley and I both do. But yeah, if you want to be working on all cylinders, you've got to get your hormones figured out first. That's the bottom line.
Yes. Now, some of our listeners I know are past, I mean, they're well
Mm-hmm.
into menopause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we kind of touched on it a little bit in our FAQ episode a couple weeks ago. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry, my dog is going ham on this bone. I keep muting myself. So I apologize if you hear something in the background. But so say somebody's in their, even broaching 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're well into their 60s, whatever. They're
Yeah.
well past menopause. Um, is it ever a good idea to, one, obviously get your hormones checked, but say things are off, then it's not too late, or to get
Well, so
HRT, or
yeah, so that actually is a Q&A that I put into this last episode, and we'll go there
okay,
again in that last episode. But
okay,
yeah, that's a great question. I know lots of people wonder, like, is it too late? Basically, you're wondering, is it too late? Like, I wasn't offered. There was a whole 20 years worth of women that were not offered hormone therapy, and it's like they were just shoved underneath the rug and everybody walked away from them. So which is just so treacherous, in my opinion. But is it too late? It honestly, it depends on you, and it depends on the comfort level of your provider. And because again, this is a, you know, treating patients, it's a joint operation. It's a team affair. It's not one person in charge of everything.
which I
It's
think,
a
if you haven't
team.
listened to our primary care episode, this alone hits home with so many people that listen to that episode, because they're like, "Oh my gosh, like it is supposed to be a team.
Hmm.
I'm just, you're not just supposed to
Yeah.
take in and not have any voice."
Right. Exactly. And so, you know, you're sitting out there, you're let's say you haven't had a period in 5 years, and you're like, okay, I'm well into menopause, but I don't feel like I'm thriving. No, it's not too late. In fact, there is sort of a clinical cutoff, and I will say that in my mind, this is not a hard and fast rule. It is squishy in my mind. It is very, very person dependent. So please hear that. But 10 years is kind of the industry standard for those who prescribe hormone replacement therapy. If it has been 10 years since your last period, and in that time you have not received exogenous hormones, meaning you did not get any prescriptions or any replacement hormones during that 10 years, then you would be outside the window. So
Okay.
that's kind of the I guess the catch-all answer. But just know that that's not 100%. So if you're struggling and it's been longer than 10 years, then, go talk to your provider. Go talk, because it's very provider dependent. And I could honestly, you know, make sure they take a good history, make sure they know exactly who you are, make sure they know what your goals are. And once you can get all that information, I can think of so many circumstances where I would be able to say, like, hey, you know what, I feel like the benefits really outweigh the risks here, so
Yeah.
let's see how
Yeah.
you feel.
Oh, so good. Okay, so this wraps up our episode on estrogen.
Yes.
And so the next episode is going to be all on testosterone, which I think
Woo.
is super fascinating. Because,
Mm-hmm.
again, like you were mentioning earlier, like, women are starting to become a lot more privy to this information.
Yeah,
And actually
definitely.
know several people now that have HRT for testosterone,
Uh-huh.
females. And so it's super fascinating. And, it's like, oh, they just want to get big and bulky. No, they literally just want to feel like a normal human, right? So I'm excited to dive into that. And again, I mentioned it in our last episode, but if you, after listening to either the first one or this one, have questions, if you're like, oh, what about this? Send us an email, shoot us a message on Instagram. We would love to hear from you and try to help answer some of these questions that you guys have. Because remember, as much as you feel like you are in this and you are so unique, I guarantee somebody else is struggling with something similar. So obviously every individual is unique and every circumstance is individualized, but some of these troubled areas can be of a comfort to know that others are also struggling. So all right, Andrea, I think that wraps it up for this episode, but we will catch you on the next one.
Bye. The content provided in the AA podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only. The podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. The information and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical advice.